Florida Crossroads is produced with support from the Florida Department of Education.
Anniversaries and celebrations are in fact a time to look back and reflect over time and history. And I think it's a very appropriate time in transportation to pause and reflect and develop some of the lessons learned, because everything that we're thinking about for the future is really a result of where we've been the last 50 years.
Hello and welcome to Florida Crossroads. I'm Beth Switzer. There's no question about it. Floridians love to get up and get on the road. And each year, millions of tourists travel to our state for sun and for fun. From Pensacola to Jacksonville, from Tallahassee to Miami, Florida's interstate highway system takes us from where we are to where we want to be. In this edition of Florida Crossroads, we pay tribute to the 50th anniversary of Florida's contribution to the interstate highway system and what it's meant to the quality of life in Florida. The origins of our modern interstate system actually began back in the summer of 1919, when Colonel Dwight D. Eisenhower traveled with a motor convoy from coast to coast. It was a slow and difficult trip that made a lasting impression on the young officer. It was at the end of World War II that General Eisenhower got his inspiration.
Eisenhower was the supreme Allied commander in World War II before becoming president in the 50s, and saw firsthand how important the Autobahn was to Germany from a military standpoint as well as an economic standpoint.
Eisenhower envisioned a 40,000-mile, four-lane national highway system. It was a concept almost impossible for most Floridians to grasp.
Prior to the interstate system, there was a system called the Florida Trails. The Florida Trails existed prior to 1926 and was the mode of transportation throughout the state of Florida. After 1926, the U.S. highway system was developed, which allowed for greater mobility to address the needs of Floridians. But the U.S. highway system was inadequate and resulted in a need for greater mobility because cars were bigger and faster.
Traveling in Florida then was quite arduous. It was all two lanes, many, as you know, small towns that you have to go through. Get out on the roadway, you're at the mercy of what kind of traffic was there. You know, you could be behind a school bus or a farmer's truck or a tractor and you were stuck.
I sold steel construction products to the highway industry and other users in part of the state of Florida, and required travel every day. I traveled every day, of course. I lived in Tampa, and I had to go all the way up to Gainesville and to Daytona Beach, and the trip from Tampa to Daytona Beach was just unbelievable in those days, traveling on State Road 92 across there, and you wound through all the little cities, two-lane road, stop and go, stop and go. So it was a very, trying experience.
But in 1956, Eisenhower's dream became reality as the federal government embarked on the largest public works project in modern history. It was called the Federal Aid Highway Act of 1956, and it would change the state of Florida forever. The national system of interstate and defense highways would be funded in part by a 3-cent per gallon nationwide gasoline tax. The rest would be funded at the state level. But the new tax-funded highway system was never really intended to serve as the local and long-distance conduit that it is today.
In the beginning of the interstate system conceptual design, the primary purpose of it was going to be to allow for the military to be dispersed throughout the country quickly to respond to an attack or a national emergency.
By the 1950s, a great deal of land had been cleared and canals built, creating more upland for development. But two further obstacles to growth had to be overcome. One dealing with comfort and the other with transportation.
The two things that helped develop Florida, especially after World War II, were A, air conditioning, and B, the interstate highway system. Because you had this great environment, but you needed to have some air conditioning to make it a little bit more livable in the summertime. And the other thing was, since we're a peninsula and such a long state, we really needed a good transportation system to get us around.
In 1956, Floridians could not have foreseen the long-term social and economic impact of Eisenhower's dream. However, Florida's State Road Board understood that this was an urgent opportunity.
Congress had passed this interstate system and expected to get those of us in the state moving on it as fast as possible.
In the 50-year history of interstates, Florida took just over 3 decades to complete its part. But it all started in the late 1950s with 2 humble sections. In the northeast part of the state, the beginnings of I-95 opened in Duval County in 1957. The first segment of Interstate 4 was opened from Plant City to Lakeland 2 years later.
The federal law said that the interstate system would go through every capital, all cities of 50,000 population or more, and then in addition to that, on certain interstates like I-10, they identified certain places that the interstate would serve.
And some of the biggest problems were in the cities, in the inner cities. So that's where we felt, particularly Governor Collins and myself, that we should initially go into the cities, and that's where we did.
They were right to build it in some urban areas first. Well, it became much more difficult after a while to build in urban areas than it was to start with. A lot more public hearings, a lot more obstacles thrown up in the way. And so they built the thing through Orlando, for instance, and Tampa and Miami, built it right down the middle of the state.
With the plans finalized and the public hearings completed, it was time to begin. But this was the mid-1950s, and the question Wilbur Jones had to grapple with was how?
I recognized that some of the states were using computers, and there was no state organization using computers in 55 or 56 or 57. I decided, wait a minute, let's get aboard in Florida. And I called in the chief engineer and I said, find me the brightest man you can find in the department. He's going to be our computer man. That was one of the things we put in effect.
In the 1960s, construction on I-4 progressed in the Tampa area and Orlando. I-75 grew north to Wildwood and south into St. Petersburg, and the I-4, I-75 interchange was completed. Segments of I-95 were being built through the heart of Jacksonville and Miami. Sections of I-10 were completed in the northeast and northwestern parts of the state from the Alabama line. Later on, I-95 shields were on the Sunshine State Parkway. I-195 in Miami, I-295 in Jacksonville, and I-110 in Pensacola were constructed. The 60s brought a sense of newness to America. We had new leaders, new music, we were entering space, and gaining civil rights. And in Florida, the interstate highway system was vigorously underway.
It was very difficult to get into the projects themselves because summer was a rainy season, and it was, like I say, it was low areas. You couldn't traverse the projects except with a four-wheel drive vehicle, and we had some old Jeeps, and they were very undependable, but that's about all you could use to get to the projects. Bugs everywhere, and that was just something you live with in the heat and humidity of Florida. It's that way everywhere.
An elderly lady, sweet as she could be, but she came out and she asked me if I would go in her home with her and see what we had done to her prize china. And I did go, and in driving piling, she said it got vibrating and the whole cabinet fell over and broke all this marvelous china that she had collected over the years. Boy, what do you say in a case like that? Of course, she was compensated for the china.
One of the most unusual sequences of contracts occurred on the demolition of buildings along I-110, which were infested with rodents.
The first contract was designed to kill the fleas. The second contract was designed to kill the rats. And the third contract was designed to demolish the buildings.
We were the engineers designer on I-4 through Tampa, and it was one of the first ones designed through a city. We had like straight grades from downtown Tampa out to 50th Street. We had it 3 lanes in each direction. We had from east going west, we had 2 lanes through the main downtown interchange. They cut down the 2 lanes through the interchange to 1 lane. And from the day it opened, it was a nightmare. And only now is it being corrected like it should have been built back then.
In the 1970s, Tampa I-4 was complete. A section of I-75 was open in St. Petersburg, and portions of I-95 opened north to the state line, and in the south from Fort Lauderdale to West Palm Beach. With the opening of Chipley to Midway, Florida's I-10 was complete. I-395 in Miami, I-275 in Tampa, and I-175 and I-375 in St. Petersburg were constructed. In the 70s, Americans endured Watergate, a nationwide recession, and President Carter said we were plagued with a sense of malaise. But in Florida, life was getting better and better. We had disco, and most of all, we had Disney.
The biggest gift for Florida has been tourists. The interstate system has provided an easier method for people outside of the state of Florida to find access to the state of Florida and to visit our state and enjoy the rich culture we have here.
When I was a young man and the interstate system was starting in 1956, I was a freshman in college, I think Orlando had somewhere around 55,000 people in it. You can see what it's done, just the Interstate 4 crossing through there. Of course, Disney and locating there because of the interstate hasn't hurt Orlando area any.
As the nation flocked to the Magic Kingdom, the people of Central Florida watched as the future unfolded before their eyes. While up in the north part of the state, I-10 construction was giving folks a fantastic look at their past.
Oh, they found the Spanish graves. They found a lot of Indian graves. That was under the construction of I-10, and it was in Leon County. And it was north of the borrow pit. They had a borrow pit that they were digging.
A borrow pit is literally a hole where material for a roadway is removed, often leaving a new lake or pond.
They found this Spanish mission. And they found graves, and they found pottery, and they found everything associated with the old original Spanish mission. And of course, everything come to a stop as far as digging a hole for the borrow. And they had to move a little ways to get away from there so that the archaeologists could dig up the mission. It was an interesting time.
In the 80s, I-75 gained completed segments in St. Pete. Later on, I-75 was pulled back from the heart of Tampa to near Lutz, while another section was open to U.S. Highway 301. I-95 was completed from West Palm Beach to Port St. Lucie, and I-595 was built in Fort Lauderdale, and construction on I-75 began to upgrade Alligator Alley. The 80s rolled in with a new president saying, "It's morning in America." But the decade saw its share of tragedy. Not only did Americans witness the Challenger explosion off Florida's Cape, but on the other side of the state, the Skyway Bridge was struck by a ship called the Summit Venture, sending 35 people and the old bridge to a watery grave.
There was a big thunderstorm that came up. The harbor pilot was bringing the vessel into port, and the vessel was blown off course. In fact, it was so far off course it was outside entirely of the navigation channel, and it missed the main pier and was so far off that it actually hit the second pier beyond the channel.
I think it was Governor Graham's determination that we're going to have to rebuild this thing, and he pretty much wanted a signature type structure. And we did look at several options. I remember that. And this particular design was very striking. It was state of the art.
It really opened the opportunity to create a new exciting bridge for Interstate 275. The older bridge did not meet interstate standards, but now the new bridge could. The old bridge was narrow and had no safety shoulders, so if a vehicle stopped, traffic backed up.
The Sunshine Skyway is the largest precast concrete cable-stayed bridge in the Western Hemisphere, and it was by far the first of its type in the United States, really the first of its kind in the world even. The durability of the structure was a really major consideration, not only from obviously the ship impact resistance, which was of course a primary focus, but from wind resistance, hurricane resistance.
It was one of the first bridges to be modeled in a special wind tunnel simulation, which included winds with 290-mile-per-hour gusts. The main piers were elliptical shaped, not only for aesthetics, but also because this design reduced the drag coefficient on the bridge.
And in terms of just the functionality of the bridge, the ability to carry more lanes in the future than you needed during the first day of the bridge's life, all of that was a part of making sure that the structure would be functional and structurally sound for a very extended period of time.
It has received 18 awards for innovation, efficiency, and aesthetics, including the Presidential Award through the National Endowment for the Arts.
I used to say that when it's completed, folks are going to come from all over just to see the bridge. I think it's beautiful.
In the 90s, the final segment of I-75 was opened from Andytown to Big Cypress. As the 90s began, Desert Storm blew in and out, and another storm named Hurricane Andrew devastated South Florida. The state's population was bursting at the seams, and although Florida's 4 interstate highways were completed, they were already becoming inadequate.
It certainly wasn't designed to handle the levels of traffic that exist today.
Consider these facts. Since 1956, the state's population has increased 337%, and its number of vehicles has jumped by 746%. Florida's interstate system consists of 3% of all roadway lanes in the state, yet carries 17% of all the state's vehicle traffic. However, the interstate system has not kept pace with this growth. As a result, more than 40% of interstate travel in urbanized areas is congested. Experts agree that while our transportation system is in need of an upgrade, it has been and will continue to be a catalyst for Florida's economic development and growth.
If it wasn't because of the interstate system, I-4, I-10, I-75, and I-95, we really would not have been able to connect the centers of commerce, airports, seaports, the big facilities at NASA, and be able to get our products to market and be able to really parlay the viability of our ports into international business centers.
Florida's transportation network is faced with an ever-increasing demand for greater capacity. This means we must invest more money, labor, and materials to improve our roads and bridges.
The interstate system certainly has served its purpose for many years and has allowed for our economy to grow, has allowed for development to occur in areas of the country that perhaps it might not have been able to occur. And now the interstate system has, in many areas, either reached its limit or is well over its limit. And now it's time for us to look for alternatives to the traditional way of improving our interstate system.
With the arrival of the year 2000 came a new administration with new hopes and plans for the century ahead. In Florida, Governor Jeb Bush initiated plans for improving Florida's transportation system. Mobility 2000, the Economic Stimulus Package, the Strategic Intermodal System, and Growth Management Transportation Projects. Now Florida faces the challenge of not just maintaining the current system, but creating a new highway system for the 21st century, one that will continue to bring quality of life to Florida's future.
Common sense tells us they can only be so big, we can only make it so wide, and it can only do so much. I think that any sort of future of transportation in Florida has to include transit systems and whatever else we can do to help the interstate continue to be successful.
I think the next step is making the intermodal connections, such as connections from seaports and airports. And at the end of the day, when you look at the strategic intermodal system that the state is developed, everything will eventually connect to the interstate.
Funding is another component to consider as federal funds fall short of Florida's needs. Toll roads are an alternative to freeways, but freeways are not free, and this user-financed option has a successful track record in Florida.
I think the future is a tolling future for roads. I think there is a tremendous amount of policy implications around the entire issue of tolling. But we have seen in Florida more than 90% of new roads built, new lane miles in Florida done through tolling, through authorities and the turnpike. I think we're going to see that trend continue.
Experts say that one solution is more efficient use of our current system in the form of value or congestion pricing of tolls based on the time of day.
What it says is if you want to use the road during the highest period of congestion, then you'll pay more, and the price will go up to make sure that the demand stays to a point where the traffic on that roadway gives you a value for being able to pay that additional fee.
But I also think that we recognize that there's significant need, significant capital, and public-private partnerships are going to become an even greater emphasis.
There's a lot of private investors, large developers, retirement funds from around the world that have a lot of money that are looking to invest it in something that will pay them back dividends over a long period of time, and roads are one type of investment they're looking at.
The environment is another issue that wasn't always addressed in the past.
In our exuberance, if you will, in trying to build a facility across the country, there were some decisions made that put the needs of the freeway facilities, I think, ahead of the sensitivity of the environment.
However, as early as the 70s, Florida's Department of Transportation and its contractors were taking environmental precautions. And in 2003, the Florida Department of Transportation began implementing a process called Efficient Transportation Decision-Making. ETDM was developed in response to Congress's call to streamline the environmental review and permitting process.
The ability to bring all stakeholders in, from the public to reviewing agencies to those people who have control over the environmental permitting process, at the table prior to the beginning of a particular project planning process, speaks tremendously about what we have accomplished. I think, given what we have done in the recent past, we can be assured of developing transportation infrastructure facilities in the state of Florida that truly live in harmony with the environment and the sensitivity of the public that we desire.
The interstate system, ultimately having been built out at this point, cost over $128 billion to complete. and by all accounts is considered to be one of the greatest public works projects in the history of the United States, if not the world.
I believe that the word united in the United States took a different meaning when the interstate was implemented. If you look at the shape of the state of Florida geographically, you would understand, and it just crosses so many and diverse communities.
Well, I think the interstate will continue to be a very important part of the state's infrastructure. It's going to have to be addressed. I think there are challenges there with the increased freight movements in the state to support us in our continued growth.
If you'd have told me 50 years down the road we'd be sitting talking about it, and I'd I guess, chuckled a little.
Yeah, I think Florida is from what I hear around the rest of the country, is the envy of the rest of the nation as far as the amount of work that's happening in Florida and the progressive ways they're doing it.
But I still to this day will go by a project if I'm riding with someone and say, our company helped build that particular project. And so it's a real feeling of accomplishment and pride to point out that you were involved in something that's so important to our state and to the whole nation.
Through the years and over the miles, Florida's interstate highway system has linked our past to our present day. And without question, it will lead us into our future. Because even though tomorrow's cosmic travelers may take routes that go straight up to the heavens, the road that takes them to their launch pad at the Cape will be a Florida interstate highway. Thanks for joining us. I'm Beth Switzer. We hope all your interstate travels are safe and happy, and that we'll see you next time on Florida Crossroads.